Welcome to the Exodus Cry podcast, where we have honest conversations around exploitation, trafficking, sexual culture, and justice.
So let's pick up the conversation about the subject of pornography and the pivot to our emphasis on this issue of pornography as an organization. Not exclusively, but the emphasis on pornography became a big focus for us as an organization. So going back to our last podcast, we talked about the journey of making nefarious and discovering these 5 ways that pornography was overlapping with sex trafficking, and then making a conscious decision as an organization to press more deeply into investigation of pornography, primarily from 2 different perspectives: from a public health, porn's impact on consumers, and a human rights, how porn is being made and the effect on performers. Right. So that journey took us from 2012, which was really when we began a deep investigation of porn, all the way through the end of 2019, going into 2020. And it was at that moment. So one of our colleagues and I were laboring together very deeply in this investigation. And our other colleague, Lila, she discovered this issue that was happening with Pornhub, the world's largest porn site. And so she had written an op-ed called "It's Time to Shut Down Pornhub." Why don't you talk for a moment on what was it that Lila discovered on Pornhub? What was the kind of like the groundbreaking revelation about this big porn company?
Yeah. Well, I remember the year before, she had just really, her Twitter had just kind of gone fire. And we were sharing an office, and it was like every day she was getting these like downloads and tweeting things that it just had like a real intense energy on it. She was kind of really like finding her voice on Twitter as a platform, so to speak. And she's brilliant, and it just seemed like a kind of a good match of this is a good outlet for sharing some truths about exploitation in the sex industry. And then I just remember, like at the end of 2019, certain investigations began to come out in the media. So the Sunday Times did an investigation into Pornhub. They found that there were some videos with children as young as 3 years old on Pornhub that had had hundreds of thousands of views, and some of these videos had been up for several years. And that PayPal cut ties with Pornhub around the time of that investigation. And this other story in the media of this 15-year-old girl from Florida who'd been missing for a year, and 58 videos of her trafficking appeared on Pornhub. That was how she was actually found, but it was under a verified account. And I remember just Lila like taking note of these and starting to tweet these stories, these instances, and really saying like, I think she was beginning to connect the dots. Like, okay, if underage individuals are on Pornhub, if trafficked missing girls are on Pornhub, if traffickers are able to upload videos for Pornhub, like what the heck is their moderation process? How is this happening? And she started tweeting more specifically on Pornhub, and we all just felt that certain like real energy on that. And then it was in January of 2020, she tweeted Pornhub's number 4 most popular video at that time. It's genuinely one of the most disturbing screenshots I've ever seen of this girl tied down, electrocuted, hot wax burning, like a really, really violent pornographic scene. And she just screenshotted that with a critique of the violence that Pornhub is clearly promoting. That tweet went viral. I remember it absolutely hitting that viral vein. As a result of that, the Washington Examiner reached out and asked her to write an op-ed. And so then it was like all of those months of what she'd begun to see and investigate. She uploaded a video to Pornhub herself just to see what is their moderation process, discovering all they needed was an email, and that she was able to get this video without any type of ID verification, age verification. And so her critique, her scathing critique, it's time to shut down Pornhub, and the Washington Examiner just laid out the case against this website that clearly, through its complete negligent moderation process, had allowed dozens, hundreds, thousands, who knows how many, of illegal content. She exposed Pornhub as a crime scene. And that was in early February 2020, that article came out.
So I think I just want to pause on this point for a moment, because I think one of the things that we talk about a lot in this movement, in this abolition, anti-trafficking movement, is this aspect of the global commercial sex industry promoting a cover narrative that is intended to obscure the inherent harms within the sex industry and to promote really a delusion, to present a perception of what the global commercial sex industry is. That cover narrative says that prostitution, pornography, stripping, these commercial sex industries are sexually liberating, empowering, that, you know, the people who are there deserve this, like this, are making money off this. It's this idea that there's this certain subclass of human beings who were sort of born into this mold of really being nothing more than a sex object. And so what we talk about is this cover narrative, partly for people to understand what's being promoted to them, what's being sold to them. But we contrast that by talking about the deeper truth. So it's this idea that, like, the sex industry functions in our world like a glacier. You see a little bit above the surface and it looks spectacular and magnificent. Like you're seeing the whole picture. Look at that big glacier. It's 100 feet high or whatever. Most people don't see that there's like 1,000 feet, below the surface or hundreds of feet below the surface is beneath the glacier. So we sort of use that analogy to talk about our work as exposing the deeper truth of what's really going on, of what's really there underneath this glacier. So I think Pornhub is a great example of that, because Pornhub had put an enormous amount of energy and resources into selling the public a certain idea about who they were. And so they had endeared themselves to the culture as being this porn chic kind of brand. And there was ads in Times Square. They were partnered with New York Fashion Week, had celebrity endorsements. There were all kinds of things that Pornhub had done to try and endear themselves to the culture. The idea being that porn is harmless and everybody masturbates. So, hey, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you might as well come here to get your fix. The reality of what was going on with Pornhub was so much more disturbing. And I wanted to just pause on this point for a second to say, this is why it is so important that we talk about the deeper truth, that we talk about what's underneath that glacier. Because what Pornhub actually was, in reality, was a septic tank of the most perverse, criminal, violent, disturbing videos of sexual assault, rape, porn, trafficking, underage, on and on and on the list goes. So Pornhub, a site that had effectively endeared themselves to the culture, millions of followers on social media, billions of hours of people watching their content, was a site that was infested with videos of real abuse, trafficking, rape, child sexual exploitation, on and on and on it goes. So it was a crime scene. And so when Lila began to kind of dig into that and begin to uncover what was going on, I think it felt shocking to people, partly because they had become such a popular brand.
Their marketing had clearly been so effective. Like, I've literally seen people wearing Pornhub merch on sweaters. Yeah.
So I can't imagine being at home going like, where can I find a new shirt? Let me get a Pornhub hoodie. Like it's just like
But they'd
so bad.
That just
It's
shows
so
how
bad.
effective they'd been at like
Yes.
promoting themselves as a brand. Like I think they were the darling of the porn
That's so awful.
I know. I wished I had a Trafficking Hub t-shirt in my bag that I could go up and give this person.
Imagine being the person at Pornhub that's like responsible for like designing and selling the merch. Like, ooh, let me make a hoodie with like our Pornhub. It's just like, I can't imagine being a walking billboard for a site like Pornhub. It's just.
They had a pop-up shop in Times Square.
So
like
bad.
they were selling like around Valentine's Day in 2020. So like literally up until the time that we began critiquing them or Lila began like speaking out, they were, I think in their minds, at the absolute top of their game. They were like, we have gotten into the mainstream in every way. I know it's so sickening.
Well, something else that we have talked about is how porn has influenced the evolution of human sexuality in two primary ways. So there's like, we have undergone over the last 70 years two major evolutions of human sexuality. One from a more of a traditional notion of sexuality, it was more kind of like a relational sexuality, to an object sexuality. And that evolution was triggered by pornography, and specifically by Playboy. And so Playboy triggered this huge evolution of human sexuality from a relational sexuality into an object sexuality. And then there's, in more recent times, been a second major evolution of human sexuality from an object sexuality to a malevolent sexuality. I'm not going to take time today to define and qualify what I mean by those terms, but just for the sake of this conversation, I'm going to reference it to say, and that was triggered by internet porn and specifically by Pornhub. So it's very interesting that if you think about the two sort of like major brands of pornography over the last 70 years, you'd have to put Playboy on one side and Pornhub on the other. And those two companies represent this major evolution of human sexuality. So the sexuality that was being, projected and invoked on a generation and colonized, I love that term. I think it was Gail Dines that first coined it. She said that our generation is being colonized by our sexuality is being colonized by pornographers. And I think that, Pornhub is one of those, major companies in the world to do that.
To give a sense of scale for listeners, at that time in 2020, Pornhub had more viewers than Netflix, Amazon, and Yahoo combined. Like in the top most viewed website. I think a lot of people have no idea just how much of the internet traffic is pornography, and Pornhub was actually owned by this company called MindGeek that own 70-80+% of all online porn tube sites. And so Pornhub was their darling that had the vast majority of their content, like tons of views. I think it was 115 million views per day. But the company that owned them had a monopoly on the entire websites, PornTube websites. So, and for people that are not even familiar with how Pornhub operates, it's kind of like a porn YouTube site where so much of it was homemade. So I think some people who've never maybe even seen porn or gone on Pornhub, please don't. It's the vast majority of the porn on those sites isn't made in studios. It's all kinds of homemade content that people can upload themselves.
Yeah, a user-based upload model. And it's not even that people at home are necessarily making the porn per se. That could happen. It's people getting a hold of very disturbing, oftentimes criminal videos and just uploading them without any problems at all, without any barriers, restraints whatsoever. And so, so that was a huge factor in them becoming, what they became, which was a site infested with criminal videos. So for us, so the Sunday Times reported on Pornhub, and Lila was beginning to tweet about Pornhub, she writes this op-ed. There was starting to become this subterranean kind of shaking that there's something is not right here, and it had a very galvanizing impact, again, because of the popularity of Pornhub. Now, internally at Exodus Cry, our whole job for the past 15 years has been critiquing the sex industry and giving a systems level analysis of the sex industry, pornography, stripping, prostitution, all this stuff. And so on one hand, it didn't feel to us all that earth shattering. It was like, this company is engaged in this activity and we need to address it. And that felt like very consistent with our critiques that we had been developing over years. But there was something that this was striking a nerve in the culture that was just different. And I remember one of the first tweets Lila did on it, and I felt the weight of it. And I even encouraged her at the time. I remember saying, stay on this. Not that she wasn't going to stay on it, but I was like, hey, from my perspective, keep going, because there's something on this. And then I remember one of our board members reached out, and he said something to me that I thought was very interesting from, just like an outside perspective. He goes, I know you and Lila, and he goes, you guys are fighters. This is not going to end well for them. And I was just like, again, big, massive, multi-billion-dollar company, little old me and Lila, and then again at that point, it was obviously like Lila really leading the charge of this, but it was like, and we got a front row seat to watch Lila's relentless ferociousness.
Yeah.
I've
never seen anything like it.
Yeah.
Like it was like
Joan of Arc.
The literal fire that she was carrying. And it felt like this thing just exploded. And so the next few weeks, like figuring out how to harness this momentum, because it struck a nerve in the culture from that one op-ed. Well, the timing was so interesting because the day after her op-ed, the BBC released a report that they'd been sitting on for months and months and delaying. And it was the story of Rose Kalimba, this survivor that the BBC had investigated and interviewed, and her story of being age 14, experiencing a brutal gang rape assault and at knife point, and videos of that being put on Pornhub, and her spending 6 months trying to get it down as a 14-year-old girl, emailing them every day. She told me sometimes up to 3 times a day. And her story, the fact that it came out the very next day, it put this survivor story and name to the case that Lila had made. And I think that the timing of those coming out, because every article that following week referenced both of those together. And so it was like you had the critique and you had the survivor story, the real life experience that really stirred up a lot of emotion, because it's one of the most harrowing stories. And she had to pretend to be a lawyer, eventually asking Pornhub to take the videos down. And within 48 hours, they responded, only when she'd set up a fake email as a lawyer. And so, it was those few weeks after that of just how do we really, this needs to become a campaign. We need to someone said, if you don't start a petition, I will. And so then it was like, okay, we need to start a petition. We weren't even planning a lot of these things. I mean, some planning came in later, but at that time, it just all happened so fast, I remember. And then,
the timing of Lila's article coming out one day, and then the very next day, the BBC released their article. Not because of Lila, just they had been working on that for a year.
Coincidentally.
So it was like boom, boom, like back to back. And both articles went viral. And the substance of those articles was so just mind-blowing. The way that Lila constructed her point about what's going on with Pornhub was so compelling. And so for anyone who may be listening to this or watching this that hasn't read that article, who's been interested in this campaign, maybe partnered, maybe shared some things, I highly encourage everyone to go back and to read those initial articles. Again, It's Time to Shut Down Pornhub by Lila Micklethwait in the Washington Examiner. And then it was the BBC article. Do you remember what that one was called? It was on Rose Kalemba. If you just Google BBC article on Pornhub and Rose Kalemba, it'll pop up. And I mean, that article was just so weighty to hear the way that they related to this person whose life had been, just not only the sexual assault, rape that she endured and encountered, but then, the fact that was then video of that was then featured on their site, and then their total disregard for her attempt to have it taken down. I mean, to be in that position, to be someone who has endured that, it's unthinkable.
Yeah. And what really came to light during that whole time was, and Rose herself called it the immortalization of her trauma, like trying to recover from the most harrowing event in your life, such as a rape like that, or trafficking victims whose videos were found on Pornhub. Not only are they trying to heal from the trauma of what they've been through, now that trauma is perpetuated by it being monetized by this website that will not take it down. The knowledge and idea that hundreds, thousands, in some cases, millions of people are watching and downloading. So that was the other thing. Like up until the end of 2020, Pornhub still had a download button, so anyone could watch and download these videos. So even as a survivor, if you were able to get your video taken down, you had no idea if a few days later someone else would re-upload it. And we had survivors telling us, like, I have to check Pornhub every day. I have to check Google every day to see if someone else has uploaded my video. We heard from people who'd left the country because of that harrowing trauma. Sometimes they were doxxed. Their private information was put in these videos. And I know I've worked with survivors from all kinds of trafficking experiences for many years. And it was a really a new insight hearing the type of trauma that it really kept them so stuck. Like, how can they heal when these videos are online? It's like it adds a whole other layer to their trauma, and it's evil. And the response, the heartless response from Pornhub was like, well, this isn't our... They just seemed to take zero responsibility. And that really became what the mission statement for Trafficking was. Like, it's time to shut down Pornhub and hold their executives accountable. Like, there needs to be justice. Like, all of this stuff has happened to these survivors. Criminal acts have taken place and been monetized by these websites. Where is the justice? And so that became the real kind of rallying cry. And it.
I remember, so we read, obviously we read all this. We're gaining an education ourselves as this is all kind of developing. And it's very difficult to stomach. It's so disturbing. And I remember, I think it was Bradley Miles who first introduced this phrase of a recurring trauma.
Yeah.
And I think it was a very powerful way to describe what victims / survivors experience and go through with something like this. And so I think that Rose's story, it created a lot of empathy and a lot of compassion on for people who read it to go, oh my God, this is awful.
Yeah.
And I don't care about all your marketing schemes. Like, if you're actually complicit in this, the way that it's been described, we want to see you taken down as well. So when the petition was started, that went viral and quickly garnered over 2 million signatures. And
from 192 countries. Like, this thing went global. And at that point, we really, this is something much bigger, and we want the whole world to know about this. And we had 300 other child protection, women's rights, anti-trafficking organizations signed on in official support. And at that point, it felt like it really went from a campaign to a global movement. Mm-hmm. And the traction, I've rarely seen something gain so much traction in the anti-trafficking movement. It was really exciting to see this resounding, it resonated with the public from so many different people, so many people, walks of life. It transcended where you stood politically, and it went beyond the anti-trafficking movement, which it just was really exciting to see.
It's what you would want to see happen for something like this, is for one of these critiques to galvanize enough interest that it becomes a global movement. So as these things are unfolding, we decide as a team, we need to all gather together in a focused way and really talk through what it is that we're doing here. And in very simple terms, Trafficking Hub, to me, represents a critique of Pornhub and MindGeek and this user-based upload model of pornography that enables and profits from videos of real abuse and trafficking. So it's a critique of that, as well as an effort to hold Pornhub, MindGeek, their executives accountable.
Yeah.
So it was very simple in that sense. Our team, we gathered together for a week of meetings. We flew colleagues in from around the nation, and we met specifically to talk through a vision and an engineering of a campaign that could hold this critique and sort of advance an effort to get this out to the masses, to hold them accountable. So we covered every aspect of what we could envision at the time, and then coming out of that week of meetings in March, we began to just really put a much greater focus and effort and intensity behind the ideas that Lila had begun to publish first in this op-ed.
Yeah. And at that point, there was a lot of media articles still being written, media invitations. She was on TV, on different news podcasts talking about this. And in a couple of years before, we'd made these 2-minute animated videos exposing various myths about exploitation and trafficking, prostitution. And so we decided this critique needs to be encompassed in a 2-minute animated video where we're able to lay the case against Pornhub, and it would be something that would be shareable. And so we kind of wrote what we wanted that critique to be, and the team that make these animated videos with us created that. And I just remember hoping it would go viral, feeling like we're in this really interesting momentum. And of course, the COVID lockdown had all happened a few weeks after this. So it was such a bizarre time in our world. People were spending so much time online anyway. And I remember Pornhub utilizing that moment and giving out free subscriptions. So they were doing their own marketing, and that was in the news of Pornhub's, offering free subscriptions to help the world get through lockdown. So then we dropped this little 2-minute animated video on our Instagram, and from Instagram to all other shared platforms that we shared the video, we tracked that it had 34 million views.
Yeah.
And that was just, that's viral of viral.
Yeah. Between the release of the op-ed, the release of the petition, and then the release of that short animated video, the story was really getting out there.
Yeah.
And it was around that time that we started to face some very significant backlash. And part of the backlash was you are affecting the ability of quote unquote sex workers to make a living. This focus on Pornhub is going to ruin the lives of sex workers. Where will they make their money if you accomplish your goals to hold Pornhub accountable? And I can't fathom the mentality that says, how dare you address the criminality and of what's happening on Pornhub? How dare you address that? Because it may affect the income of sex workers. The logic of that argument is just so utterly absurd.
Trying to shut down any type of criticism.
Yeah, which is the porn industry is so used to being this industry that operates without any accountability at all whatsoever, that to critique them, it creates for them, I think, some kind of like existential crisis. How dare you, existential crisis? How dare you threaten the law? And it's, you know, and it's co-opting this group of people that they try to cast as being this oppressed group, so that you can't touch them, you can't say anything, you can't. This idea of this sex worker narrative, it would be the equivalent to, you know, going to high school somewhere where several of the leaders of this high school, the principal, the vice principal, so on and so forth, are guilty and complicit in, you know, abusing children at the school. Then you attempt to hold them accountable, and then people say, how dare you try to hold them accountable? These poor teachers won't be able to make a living. It's just an absurd argument.
Yet there were porn performers who'd had their content been stolen by porners. There was already people even in the industry critiquing Pornhub and saying, actually, it's the total opposite. Pornhub has prevented us from even making a living. They've stolen our content. And so Pornhub was already doing the very thing that they're accusing us of doing.
Right.
Which just felt really ironic to me.
So the critique of Pornhub is a very substantial critique. The backlash was, how do we silence these people who are trying to hold them accountable? I know, let's throw mud at their face. And so there was this attempt to discredit us, to silence us by throwing mud at us and completely avoiding all accountability on their part. And it was an odd experience to go through that, because again, we felt that the critique of Pornhub was substantive enough that we should have been able to find agreement across the board. And to that point, there were a number of people in the porn industry who did end up aligning with us and saying, we might not agree on everything, but we definitely agree on this. This is wrong. This needs to be shut down. But yeah, there were those who were just so offended that we were attempting to hold them accountable. And it's just wild.
I think a lot of people saw through it, though. I had some feedback that were like, if their only defense on the things that you guys are saying is, oh, don't listen to them, they're on some moral crusade. And they're like, yeah, they're on some moral crusade. Like, I'm glad there's a group of people that have enough ethics and morals to actually call you guys out. And if you're not even addressing those claims, you're dismissing them, like that actually gives more insight into like I had one girl who was on Pornhub and she was so disturbed by the things we were saying that she posted our animated video on her Pornhub account, and within minutes her entire Pornhub account got completely shut down. And so she contacted me and she was like, they'll shut down my account for posting a short video critiquing it, but they won't take down illegal videos of minors or rape or trafficking victims who are contacting them for months or years, begging them. And she was just so disgusted and disillusioned. She was like, I thought Pornhub was an ethical porn site, and realized, oh, no, that's not. That's how they were trying to brand themselves. And it was a complete facade, a complete current narrative, like you said. And that was being like widely exposed. And the day that we released the animated video, I remember going into a coffee shop and mentioning it to the barista, and they were like, oh my gosh, I saw that this morning. I shared it with everyone. And they called the other barista over and they were like, did you see that Pornhub video? And they were like, yeah, I saw it this morning too. They were like, these guys made that video. And so that was the moment when I really realized, everyone is watching this video. Celebrities were sharing it. The most watched porn performer Mia Khalifa, who has spoken out extensively about the exploitation that she experienced in porn, she shared it. And it was just like, suddenly this well-formulated critique of Pornhub was out there. And I think that was probably the moment that they really began to get scared. Like, oh, there's actually a threat against us.
So the issue with the backlash is, just going back to that point for a second, is that systems of oppression will always resist movements of freedom.
That's such a good line.
If you think about like an interpretive lens to view the world, I think of malevolent and benevolent forces of good, evil, light, dark, truth, deception, and the world seems to organize itself around these malevolent or benevolent forces. And we see that play out in the hierarchies of our world, where there are malevolent hierarchies and benevolent hierarchies, and institutions that are seeking to bring about good into the world, and institutions that become very corrupted. And so if you look at, for example, slavery, even when after slavery was abolished, it didn't go away overnight. There was still sharecropping. There were Jim Crow laws that were passed. There were white racist terrorist groups like the KKK that rose up. There were ghettos that were formed. There were all kinds of things, again, to the point that systems of oppression resist movements of freedom. And so there is no progress without struggle. And Martin Luther King stated this: the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So the kind of justice that we want to see in the world, the kind of freedom for people that we want to see in the world, is moving in that direction, but every inch, every foot has to be fought for. And I think that, what we observed with the Trafficking Hub campaign, what we observed with Pornhub, is this entity that had developed into this malevolent force of darkness and violence and sexual assault and criminality and all of this. And as we began to address it, there was this pushback against the attempt to expose, to bring accountability, to bring, freedom from this system of exploitation. So, when I think about how this campaign began to take shape, had Lila stopped with the one tweet, I don't know how far this campaign goes. The incessant, repeated, embracing the struggle for progress by coming back again and again and again, I think is what has brought about this global movement now where they are facing accountability. And that is what's needed. But it's helpful for me to look at it that way, to understand the backlash. Because when you point out the obvious, things that are happening on Pornhub, again, that they're enabling and profiting from videos of real abuse, trafficking, all this, denying justice to the victims, so on and so forth. When you observe all of that's been discussed about, it's just such an obvious, these people need to be shut down. The idea of being in a mindset, in a headspace that goes, no, I'm going to resist this, and I'm going to resist it because I believe myself to be morally superior. It's what is happening? Again, outlets, certain outlets whose names will not go named on this podcast, sort of lecturing us from a perspective of moral superiority, trying to throw mud in our face to silence and discredit us from what we were doing with this Trafficking Hub campaign. The thought of that is just so bizarre.
For the most part, it's like we tried to bring correction to some of those articles where we could, but at some point it's like, hate is going to hate. And I remember just trying to keep my own heart in a place of I'm going to bless our enemies. I'm going to pray for them, because I can't even imagine being in a headspace where you would even try to defend the kind of things that we're critiquing that's happening on Pornhub. Your worldview and your internal life must be so different to mine. And we're just going to keep our eyes on the mission and keep focusing on the messaging. And I felt to everything you're saying about movements of freedom, 2020 was a real year of injustices bubbling to the surface and a real cry. I just don't even know if this whole movement could have happened at any other year. It was such a unique, bizarre year, and so many things were coming to the surface, and so many people were spending additional time online paying attention to these things. And so then we started doing protests. There was a group in LA who began organizing these weekly protests out front of the MindGeek Pornhub offices. And then we organized a larger protest on the UN's October 2nd International Day Against Violence. We organized an art contest, and there was this art show. And so all these things were happening. Our social media was like blowing up as every day we were presenting another critique, another article. Survivors were coming forward by the dozens to us, to other groups. We were connecting them with lawyers because it began to become really apparent, okay, what is it going to look like to hold Pornhub accountable? Some of these survivors have had their lives completely ruined, and they've never had groups actually saying, we want to fight for justice for you. There needs to be restitution. And so we were hearing a lot of survivor stories, which was helping us understand from so many perspectives what was really taking place on Pornhub. And then in the midst of that, award-winning journalist from the New York Times, Nicholas Kristof, gets connected with us, and he decides to do his own investigation of what is taking place on Pornhub, speaks to some of these survivors. And I remember within 10 minutes, he said he'd found non-consensual content of unconscious women, that in the videos, their eyeballs were being touched to check that they were unconscious. And he writes over several weeks of investigating. He puts together this piece.
Several months, yeah.
Like about 3 months. The piece was titled "The Children of Pornhub." And I remember the night before it getting released thinking, this is going to be like the equivalent of like the David Smooth stone hitting the Goliath, like right in the spot. Like his critique is going to build on everything that's come forth the last year. And he's such a brilliant writer, and just that article again, if anyone hasn't read it, The Children of Pornhub, it was on the front page of the New York Times. The survivor whose story the piece centralized around was called Serena, and this beautiful, compelling photograph of her was on the sleeve of the front page of the New York Times. And that article was the tipping point for this whole movement, I believe.
Yeah, it was the moment where it felt like their castle was beginning to crumble. To be able to be in the trenches, on the front lines, and really to observe the relentless, ferocious, intelligent leadership of Lila through that season, playing out over time, and then culminating in that moment where they deleted 80% of their website and they removed the download feature. And it was just, it was deeply inspiring. And here's the thing is that we have the capacity to change the world through the choices that we make. And when you look back over history, and again, one of our heroes being William Wilberforce, 46 years of perseverance in laboring for the abolition of slavery actually brought about not only the abolition of slavery throughout the British Empire, but the emancipation of slaves as well. So it's deeply encouraging to be reminded of the power of our choices in this world and how our choices can actually change the world and how important that is, not only for our generation, but for future generations. So I want to speed this conversation up just to get through kind of the bullet points of what has transpired with regards to Pornhub and their parent company, MindGeek, so we can kind of bring this conversation to its closure. But it didn't end there. So what happened next?
Yeah. Well, just before Pornhub deleted 80% of their site, which was about 10 million videos, the thing that led to them doing that, of course, was Visa and MasterCard canceling all payment processes for Pornhub. They later, several months later, did that for every MindGeek-owned site. December 2020, it was just Pornhub, and that was what caused them to delete all their unverified videos. And so the the Girls Do Porn channel was a verified video, and on one of our other podcasts we hear from a survivor of the Girls Do Porn trafficking. So Pornhub as a website was also partnering with many other like trafficking partner channels, but them deleting the download button, and a few days before we'd even laid out some of those demands, and each one of them, like, it was like, oh my gosh, this is all literally happening. And I remember on that day, Pornhub released a statement in which they mentioned the Trafficking Hub and Exodus Cry and our friends at the National Centre on Exploitation as well in their statement. And I screenshotted it, like, they've just given us the credit for, they're trying to blame us, but in my mind, they've given us the credit for something that is just historical, a breakthrough. We had so many messages from survivors that day. Like, I just checked all my videos being exploited on Pornhub, finally taken down today in that purge. So that purge just felt like so many breakthroughs, like, 10 million breakthroughs, 10 million moments of justice happened on that day. So then it's just since then been this, Serena, the survivor, $100,000 were raised for her, which and some other survivors, which has changed their life. So many more articles since then have been written. So many other, like, currently to date, there's around $1 billion worth of lawsuits against MindGeek, around 200 survivors suing them. Visa is being named in the lawsuit as well, and their attempt to be removed has been dismissed by the judge. And it was at that point when Visa and MasterCard then cut ties with the Traffic Junkie, the advertising arm. So from every single angle, Pornhub is being exposed, is being held accountable. Over the summer, their CEO and COO were officially forced to resign. There was mass layoffs at the company. More and more whistleblowers have come forward, just sharing that. And of course, then the Canadian Parliament in early 2021 went on to have many survivors share and testify, and there was an official investigation. For the first time, we saw their CEO and COO appear on camera attempting to defend themselves. We made several videos cutting those interviews up because of some of the ridiculous, outlandish things that they said. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Our whole staff watched through these Parliament videos online, like jaws dropped, like, I can't believe they're trying to justify themselves in this way.
Yeah. So to put this into perspective, MindGeek, the parent company of Pornhub, owns approximately 90% of all online pornography. The user-based upload model of pornography had become the 800-pound gorilla. They had become the most prominent pornography sites on the internet. The Trafficking Hub campaign has challenged that model and has disrupted that model, and so we're still in. This is still underway. All the developments that are happening, but the major credit card companies severing ties, the lawsuits that are coming out, and again, we've watched Lila tweet day after day after day after day. We've watched her relentlessly pursue justice for victims and accountability for the perpetrators. That is the heart and the spirit and the essence of what this movement is about, of what we're about. And I'm just so deeply encouraged to see that, when we not only personally make choices, towards this end, to hold perpetrators accountable, to bring justice for victims, but when we unite collectively as a people to those ends, that we can actually bring about change in the world. I think of a situation for you, Helen, where you went to Moscow, Russia, to do an outreach around the World Cup, penetrated a Nigerian trafficking ring, worked with the local police to organize a raid, bring the pimps and traffickers to justice, bring freedom to the victims. I love being in a position to be able to observe like the incredible leadership of people like you and Lila and those around me, where we're working together to fight for freedom and justice in our world, and to actually see that happen. It's just so deeply inspiring, encouraging. And we wanted to sit and talk about this story because It is that, and credit goes to so many people. It's the soccer mom, who are at home, who sign the petition, who share it on their social media. There's the attorneys that got involved, the victims and survivors that courageously spoke up and used their voices, the behind the scenes marketing team that was a part of this, and all the various organizations that partnered together, and those in visible positions of leadership like Lila as well. And so it's a huge victory for us. It's a victory for the Trafficking Hub campaign. It's a victory for this movement. And it's a victory, I don't want to sound over dramatic, but it is a victory for humanity.
Yeah.
This was a malevolent force of darkness that had organized itself into a system of violent exploitation. And it is being held accountable. It is being eradicated from our society as we speak. That is a victory for humanity. So I don't know where all this goes, but we're on the journey. We are here fighting every day to hold perpetrators accountable, to bring freedom to the oppressed, and vindication to survivors and victims.
So good. That's such an inspiring final thought with all of this. And I feel like it's been deeply encouraging for people to witness justice, because there's so many things in our world that are deeply disturbing and discouraging, and there can be that cry of like, where is the justice? And this movement, everything that's happened in 2 years, just weeks ago, their Instagram account got shut down, their 13 million followers. Like, this feels like an avalanche of justice, and there's still, like you say, waves and waves happening. One final update that I think is really important to mention as we kind of bring this update to a close is that now laws are being drafted to prevent other porn hubs from popping up. And so a piece of legislation called the PROTECT Act has just been introduced that would prevent videos, non-consensual, underage, illegal videos from being uploaded to any porn site. So it brings so many covers of accountability that would force the uploader of every video to verify age and consent, the people in these videos. It would put accountability on websites, and as far as any type of non-consensual pornographic content. It's a brilliant piece of legislation, deeply informed by survivors. And Exodus Cry and Cozy, we did this symposium over the summer with many survivors and spoke with many politicians, because there really isn't a lot of current modern laws around pornography that reflect what the current situation of these user-generated porn tube sites are. There needs to be a lot more accountability, and these sites were operating knowing that there weren't legal consequences for them. And so between the lawsuits and the litigations and new legislation being put into place, I really feel like the needle of justice for the protection of survivors is moving, and that's something that we can all feel encouraged about. There'll be more information about the PROTECT Act coming out soon. Lila is still tweeting on the regular, holding Pornhub account. Like, she's determined to see this fully through. And there's more waves of justice that I believe will be coming. The petition is still open. So if anyone is listening to this that hasn't put their name to the petition, it's like 2.5 million. It's still rising. And we encourage people to check that out. Trafficking Hub has become this worldwide movement, and we're so honored by the role that we got to play, and many others got to play with it. It's almost a bit nostalgic talking through all the breakthroughs. It's really encouraging. So I'm glad we got to just reflect on that today.
You can check out all our podcast episodes, articles, and films at exoduscry.com. And join the daily conversation by following Exodus Cry on all major social platforms.